we are gonna start jumping into the fun stuff. I don't know if it's fun, but which is really around how to bring people together to start talking about this. So we've looked at our data, we've looked at some evidence-based pieces, we've looked at how this applies to health equity and social determinants. Now it's really around how do we start bringing stakeholders together. So I just want to talk a little bit about stakeholders, and then we'll talk about who are some folks you could get engaged with you too. So a couple things. We all know what a stakeholder is, but some questions I always like to ask are, you know, who's likely impacted by our program? And if it's youth, do you have youth engaged? If it is parents, do you have parents engaged? But you also want to make sure you're filtering in there some folks that might be able to help you within the next phase or the other things you want to do. So can you find community connector? Is there people who can implement the decision? So that might be elected officials. It might be someone on a school board. Anybody who could potentially be engaged in a way to make this more sustainable. Of course, we want the people with relevant information or expertise. So like, for example, for Sandra's, we talked about a pediatrician might be an appropriate person to bring in here. So these are all components of how we choose stakeholders. So we're just going to take a few minutes and have you guys think about stakeholders, but I'm going to challenge you. So there's the stakeholders we always have, and feel free to write them down, and you know who they are. They might be your hospital, they might be others. And then I want you to think outside the box. Who is a stakeholder you have never interacted before that could be vital to this work and that you need to start getting to know? So I'm going to just give you some examples from my world, and they might be obvious ones to you, but they weren't to me when I started this work. So as I started to work on social determinants of health and specifically looking at the environment, I brought on the coalition, the person who ran the bus system in Billings when I was in Billings. I can tell you that he also made me work hard to figure out why he was there. One of the very first questions he asked me is, what does my job have to do with this? But the more engaged he got, the more he started to recognize that transportation is such a vital part of a healthy community, whether it's access to care, whether it's actually physical activity. People who ride the bus are more physically active than people who have cars, in case you guys wanted to know that fact. And so he started to see the connection, but he was a partner who had never sat at the table for us on the health side of it. So think about those non-traditional partners, inviting them in, and who could those be? The other piece, which actually isn't in your workbook, so this is me pushing you to the other side of it, which is, what table should you be sitting at that you feel like you're not sitting at right now because you are a non-traditional partner for them? And so those two pieces are what I want you to take a few minutes to think about, and then we'll come back and share with the group. So who are your non-traditional and traditional partners? And then what table are you personally not sitting at that you should be sitting at? So if you don't have answers on everything, that's okay. We'll all throw out ideas for each other, but I'm going to call you guys out and ask you to tell me any non-traditional partners you came up with and any tables you want to invite yourself to. I'm a big believer in invite yourself to the table. So let's see here. Does anyone want to go first? Otherwise, I'll just start. How about Sandra?
Okay. Well, since I'm talking about parks, and there's a brand new park that's been established locally, and it has a veterans memorial area. Veterans clubs are organizations. I have never thought of working with them before, but that would be non-traditional. running enthusiasts and possibly somebody who's asthma or lung expert or a cancer or lung cancer survivor or something like that. And what table I should be sitting at, probably our local trails committee. The trails are connected to the parks and or a park board. But at the stage in my life, I'm trying to get rid of activities. So I'm gonna have to be really careful on this.
I get that. And I'm not saying you have to sit at it today, but I think even, and maybe that's where you just think about is that could you get someone from that trails committee to be a liaison to your group?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I love the ideas you came up with. I love the veterans piece, particularly if that's already in the park and they already have a connection to that park. They're going to want to see that park succeed. They're going to want to see it grow and flourish, and anything that can help that. That's a great connection.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra.
Mm-hmm.
Robin.
I have the state libraries, even though adolescent health, you wouldn't think that, but in a lot of communities, that's the hub, like the community hub that adolescents may go to and even elementary kids go to. So state libraries can help with pediatric disaster and resources. I really have to do work on the youth. I think I don't have a youth actually on my advisory committee, and that seems like that's a no-brainer, but so that was a good idea. I'm gonna try to get some youth, and I have adolescent health programs, Montana Hospital Association healthcare preparedness programs. I think school bus drivers is a good idea too. I don't have that representation because even middle school kids, bus drivers can be aware of mental health issues and hopefully talk with the teacher or administrator of that school. So that's an idea that I will work on as well. And I think that I should be on the Montana Healthy Kids advisory committee. So I'll look into that because they work with CHIP and they work with Medicare.
Those are great. I love the non-traditionals of library, bus drivers. Youth, I agree, are one of those I many times have thought, I can't believe I don't have youth on a group. They are harder to engage. You have to be pretty careful about when your meetings are and how they will access them. I do think for better or for worse, you can say what you like or don't like about Zoom, but they have opened up some opportunities for us, particularly with the youth that are more technology savvy and might be comfortable attending meetings in that capacity. It might make things a little easier that have been barriers in the past for youth attending. Great ideas. Erica.
There's a lot of non-traditional stakeholders that we know we want to work with and just haven't built up the relationships with yet. Youth is a big one. We've tried in various different ways to work with youth. We're hoping to have a youth participatory action research project this upcoming school year, and we actually have funding to pay the youth stipends. So hopefully that helps significantly. Some other groups or stakeholders that we've talked about wanting to engage, coaches and athletic directors, because there's definitely some programming around reaching student athletes. And then a project I would love to do at some point is around implementing a better comprehensive sex education program in local schools. And to have that be successful, I would want to work with the faith community and parents so that we have people from those communities advocating for the curriculum to hopefully make it easier for the school to implement something.
Yes, I love it. And that is one thing we didn't talk about, which is a way to sometimes choose your stakeholders is who do you think is gonna oppose it? and get them in at the beginning so that they're part of the development of it.
Hillary, I think when you get a little further from your computer, you're a little harder to hear.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So what I said is it's a great idea to think about who could oppose the work you're doing and how do you draw them in at the beginning. And so that faith-based, but think of that for others too. You know, I don't know, you know, it's always just kind of like flash in your head. Who do you know is going to hate this idea? And how do I draw them in? Were there any tables you wanted to be sitting at, Erica?
We already talked about the early childhood one, but that's my like number one. Yeah. I really want to be at that table.
Perfect. I like it. I like the passion to get there. And don't be afraid to invite yourself. That's what I always say. They want to have their members as broad as possible too. And so I really have not been in many scenarios where people have hesitated when I've said, do you mind if I attended? Usually they've been like, yeah, great, wonderful, please come. All right, Linda, I'm gonna turn up so I can hear you.
Hopefully you can hear me. So I think obviously our staff members in our health departments are traditional stakeholders. But I was thinking outside of our traditional stakeholders in the community, the Montana Independent Living Project, because they do deal with access issues to community parks, trails, buildings if they're disabled per se. So milk for sure, and I really off the top of my head can't think of others, but also maybe being at one of the health board meetings with the commissioners as someone who I've never worked with before. Mm-hmm. Indirectly, I guess, yes, but not directly.
Thanks, Linda. I mean, the other ideas I can think of for you, I can't think of necessarily a set person, but as you're looking particularly at the vending machines, is there any, locations that you want those that you can start bringing people in that either own those locations and or have a connection to them?
We do work with disability rights in some respects, and they have a separate building not located in the health department. That's one thought. It would be great to have them in casinos in town, but I don't think they'll allow it.
But I mean, another place of, can you find a way to ask someone who may be influential to sit at your table and at least get you in the door to have the conversation?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good idea.
Thanks, Linda. Joshua.
Hello. Yeah, so in terms of, let's see, sorry, I wrote this down. Workbook, okay. Stakeholders that I would like to see there is the tribal government legislative body. Would probably be number one. Number two would be tribal department serving food. Surprisingly, several of them are linked into serving food in various forms. And then youth and people with low income. So I would like to really try to include them in the process to try to get their input, because it seems like youth and low income folks are often overlooked and their opinions aren't elicited very, very often. And then in terms of non-traditional, I was thinking Lake County, Missoula, and Sanders County commissioners and those governments, because historically and in contemporary times, these counties and in particular some of the commissioners are really opposed to the tribal government. So so trying to reach out to them and figure out if there's some common ground to try to work around this topic. And then two other non-traditional possible partner stakeholders would be local childhood providers. Trying to link them in. I think that might be some interesting opportunities there. Number 3, farmer market food sellers, people selling, food in the farmers markets. I think they're doing some really interesting work in Missoula County, the farmers markets there, and I don't think similar kind of work is taking place in the farmers markets north of Missoula.
Any tables you want to be sitting at that you feel like you're not currently at?
I would be interested in the youth, interacting with youth and low-income people, and also the county commissioners, just because those are, especially the county commissioners, because, I've only read about what they do and say in the papers. And so it'd be interesting to have a front row seat to see, how they respond or are willing to work on this particular issue.
Yeah, great. And those are pieces, I mean, even just going to commissioner meetings, when there's nothing on the agenda you want to comment on, you just want to see how they function, what they say, you can start to get a feel for elected officials just sitting through some meetings. Sure. It also, at least in my opinion, particularly if I've been in a place where I know I'm going to have to speak at a meeting, it can make me more comfortable with knowing how it's laid out. How do you address people when you're speaking, etc. And they notice who sits in the crowd. Sure, and so, just starting to make that face-to-face contact can be super helpful.
Sure.
Great ones. So just one that I want to mention, just because nobody mentioned it and it may or may not be relevant, but a super overlooked, I think, piece of this is the business and economic side. So thinking about businesses, Chamber of Commerce, your economic development, tourism, whatever it may be, often the topics you're working on matter to them too. When you really start to look at the economic side of a lot of the health projects, they help, people want to move to a community that has these pieces in place. People want to move to a community that cares about these issues. And you can often get them to kind of buy into the project. And particularly if you do the economic development group or the chamber, they can bring a lot of individual businesses on board or have that influence to ask them for things. So just think about them too. They often are an overlooked partner.
Can I say something else? Something I was thinking about in trying to select partners and non-traditional partners is, I was thinking about, trying to decide, is it really worth it? We only have so much time, and right. Some groups we're probably never going to change or have them come to the table or meaningfully participate. And so do you have any suggestions on how to decide that, or when to cut bait or not even engage? Because honestly, I mentioned the county commissioners, Lake County in particular, is very hostile towards anything that the tribal government does. And in my initial reaction is they're a lost cause. And I wouldn't even begin to engage them because I just don't see the point. And it seems like a waste of resources and time.
So, this is my own personal take, so take it for what it's worth. My 2 cents would be, no one's a lost cause, but if they're not an easy win, I wouldn't totally drop them, but I wouldn't spend a ton of time on them. I think what I have found with elected officials, which is why I also sometimes spend the time just attending meetings when I'm not on the agenda, is you got to find the hook. So while they may outwardly look like they don't like a specific topic, there could be one of them who has, I don't know, I'm making stuff up right now again, but a diabetic child who's super concerned about nutrition in the schools. And so if you can try and kind of find ways to personally engage them and not just engage them as an elected official, but engage them as a community member, a lot of times you can get buy-in. I think you are in a different scenario from a standpoint of you're doing this as a PhD project, but I think I would challenge you to think about, what do you need to do for your project for school, and what are you trying to leave behind as a sustainability piece?
Sure.
Are there some partners that you could bring in that are going to help push this forward? And if so, how do you start setting them up for success after your departure?
Okay.
But yeah, there's for sure going to be people who, are going to be a lost cause. But I think, I don't know, I'm that person that continues to weasel my way in. And I tend to do things so that nobody can claim they didn't know what was going on. Like, I'm the person that's like, well, I'm just going to keep you on my email list. And if you don't want to read the emails, that's fine. But then they always had the opportunity. They always had that information in front of them. And I think then when you go back to them, it's like they know you've actually been working on things. They've seen the notes from meetings. They've seen those pieces. Those are just kind of the things I do to like push the path forward. Does
Nice.
anyone else have suggestions on that piece? When to cut and when to push?
One of the guest speakers in my MSW program was a lobbyist for the American Heart Association, Amanda Cahill, I think her name was. And I had all sorts of feelings about her recommendations, but she was talking about how with certain legislators, she doesn't personally speak to them. Like, she hires another lobbyist to speak to them for her because she knows that she will never be listened to. And that is a really hard pill to swallow for me. And I certainly am not going to like recommend that other people choose that tactic, but that's like always stuck with me of like, wow, okay. Sometimes that's what needs to be done.
Well, and I think it does go back a little bit, and I can see why it's a hard pill to swallow, but it does go back a little bit to that conversation we had earlier around finding people who may have influence. So recognizing, are you better off finding the right people to influence the commissioners or others? And if so, who would that person be, and how do you engage that person?
That's a better organizing way to look at it than how I was presenting it. Thank you.
Okay, so now I want to just jump into some of these hard conversations we're already having, which is how do you actually pull people together? So I just wanted to dive into some lessons learned on my part, some facilitation strategies for you guys. Jump in. I know you guys all have this experience and might have lots of ideas that I'm not thinking of or am not sharing. So a couple things, and these are just my lessons learned on successful facilitation. Number one, I'm a big believer in formalized expectation. So when people come in to the meeting, why are they there and what do you want from them? Are they there just to provide ideas to you? Are you asking them to actually do work? What do you want from them? And so I think the more you as a facilitator pulling this together can be clear on why you're here and what I'm asking from you, you're going to get more of A, the right people at the table, B, they're actually going to follow through. So I've had the scenarios where I came in with the expectation that the coalition was going to be a working coalition and do the work. They came in with the expectation that they were going to give me ideas on what we needed to do. That then doesn't work out because then I'm asking for volunteers and they're all staring at me like, what? Why are you asking for me to volunteer for something? So keep that in mind as you're setting it up and make sure people know when they show up at the table what it is you're asking them for. Flexibility. It's never going to go as planned, period. If you ever have a single coalition meeting that goes as planned, please call me. I will celebrate with you because that's an incredible thing. You will always get off time. You will always have someone that disagrees, maybe not every meeting, but I'm just saying, like, you will have something, you will have technology that doesn't work. You will have something that comes into play. And so just finding your way of rolling with that, which I think is easier for some of us than others. I will tell you, it's not easy for me. I tend to like set an agenda like I did with this time, where I have, like, I literally have written down every amount of time I'm going to spend on something to make sure that's my way of organizing, and that doesn't work. I can do it with the best of intentions, but I got to figure out how to ebb and flow. Thinking about how you want the decision-making process to work. So, you know, and making sure they know how you want the decision-making process to work, or they're deciding it themselves. So whether it's delegating decisions, majority, consensus, whatever it is, but that everyone knows, again, why they're there, and then how a final decision will be made. We already kind of talked about that. What type of involvement and input do you want? And then I think this is super important, which is to be respectful of everyone's time. And so you do need to sometimes, as a facilitator, be the facilitator and keep track of time and halt conversations and move people forward. And so thinking through how you'll do those things in advance is going to be really important. I think that's also where letting people know the expectations, so you can let them know the expectations of how long that discussion is going to last, just puts people in the right place to be with you on this. Some methods that I have used, really two primary methods. One is just brainstorming. So there's some really easy ways to brainstorm. I'm sure you guys have all been in meetings. I love Post-it notes. I will not lie. Every color, every style, you name it, I love them. I like to develop creative energy in a lot of scenarios and just say, like, write one idea on each Post-it note and put it on the wall. There's no bad ideas. We're not going to discuss them until you get further into it. What this helps do from my end is stay away from that discussion of, we've done that, we've tried that, it didn't work. And no matter how much you try, I guarantee you, every topic you guys are all working on, someone before you has tried it in some capacity. Maybe they went about it differently. Maybe they, you know, had a whole different team member, but you will eventually hear, been there, done that, tried that. And that's not bad. We can learn from that. But sometimes if it was tried 20 years ago with a whole different city council, you know, let's try it again. And so I utilize brainstorming to try and get away from some of those conversations, particularly if I think I have people seated at the table who are going to do that. Another way that, if you really just want to get feedback, is to have a full proposal to present to people. You know, to really say, here's what we're thinking, poke holes in our plan. Here's what we're thinking, help us figure out if this could succeed. That's super helpful for when you have a group and you have limited amount of time to use them. And you've set the expectation that they're really a feedback group. If they're really a feedback group, then give them enough things to provide feedback on. So this piece, I laugh because there's no other way to say it than you need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. There will be people that don't like ideas. There will be people that walk out of meetings. There will be, even if you think you have set the most benign agenda ever, there's going to be something that triggers somebody in all the conversations you guys have laid out today. These are tough topics. They can make people uncomfortable. So you have to be ready to facilitate through that uncomfortableness and thinking about it ahead of time, so you know how you're going to deal with that. So just some methods that I've used before: the boomerang, which is kind of returning the question. So when someone says, we've tried that and it didn't work, or we can't do that, you know, why why do you think we can't do that? What do you think will get in the way? What do you think are the barriers? Has anything changed since we did that the first time? So becoming that curiosity, and truly, if you think of it as curiosity, you ask, the questions come to you. You don't even need to think about them necessarily in advance. They will come to you if you're just curious about, why does that person feel that way? Don't judge their response, get curious about it. I think it's also okay to call out the uncomfortable. If there's an elephant in the room, call it out. Like, hey, it's very quiet in here. What does the silence mean? You know, what's going on? What can you guys share with me? Let's cultivate this culture of openness and trust, and what stays said in this room stays in this room. This can be a really good place where you could also set some of those rules for meeting together, where kind of as a group, people set what are the ground rules of, you know, there's the obvious ones like no interruption, but also just what happens in the room stays in the room, so people can feel comfortable talking about different things. But as a facilitator, you gotta be okay with it, even if it makes your belly hurt. Pulling people back. So whether they are off topic, they're mad about something, finding ways to regain focus. So it can just be reminding everyone why you're there. It can be actually, maybe you've written in advance everything up on a slide or a poster board of, here's the purpose of today's meeting. Something that really allows you to pull back when people are getting off track. I'm a big fan of the parking lot. I know not everybody is, but that parking lot of, here's this flip chart over here. Thank you for that idea. It doesn't totally, it's, you know, not exactly on focus with what we're looking for today, but such a good idea and we don't want to lose it. I'm going to write it over here so we can come back to it later. I think number one, that helps people feel like you're hearing them, you're listening to them, you value their idea, even if it's not directly in line with that meeting. Number two, there are so many good ideas that can come out of meetings, and just because they're off track does not mean that they don't deserve the time and attention later. Does anyone else on this specific topic have any other thoughts, ideas, stories, anything they want to share on uncomfortable meetings and ways that you've seen them dealt with well before, or not dealt with well before, that you want to make sure to tell us not to do?
I get the comment quite a bit. Well, we didn't do that before, or we didn't do that in Arizona, Washington, or wherever. And that's a hard one to do. You know, we can't do that kind of comeback, but I like, what do you think will get in the way? What are the barriers?
Right. And I really do find that curiosity. I heard the quote one time, like, you can't be judgmental if you're curious. You can't be judgmental and curious at the same time. I'm not sure that's totally true, but when you really think about it, if you dive into, instead of being like, oh, you're a Debbie Downer and you're ruining this meeting, and instead go to like, well, tell me why not? Like, explain that to me. They may have some very valid reasons, or they may not, and they'll realize it when they're pushed on the answer. The other thing I would say, and I know this isn't always feasible, but there's sometimes you're not the right facilitator. So just recognize, like, if there is money to bring in a facilitator, if there are other people at your organization who are detached from the subject, there's sometimes you want to be a player. And if you want to be a player and you want to throw out ideas and you want to be part of the conversation, find someone else to facilitate it. And does not always need to be a professional facilitator. I bet you all work with people who do this pretty regularly and can come in and just be a facilitator of a meeting. Any other thoughts, ideas, questions? Okay. So agenda. These are just you know, make sure, again, you're focusing on outcomes, you have those present. I know you guys know a lot of this, but it's always good to go over it. Pad the time. Number one thing to do, no one cares if they get out of a meeting early. No one. There's not a single person who will be mad at you for ending a meeting early. There are people who will be mad if it goes over, will walk out if it goes over because they have to. Maybe they have another meeting. But so make sure as you're going through things that you're giving enough time to each subject, and don't be afraid to give it extra time and let it end early. Include breaks if it's a set time. Those ground rules we already talked about. Startup and introductions can take a while, but I think they can be a vital part of a meeting too. No one's going to be open and honest if they don't know who's sitting around the table, if they don't know who they're looking at. And so make sure you give the time for that piece. I always schedule the next meeting. If you let people walk out of the room without knowing when you're coming back to do something, they will walk out of the room and forget about it, and you'll be lucky to get them back together. Follow-up and evaluation is hard. A lot of grants require it, so you can follow those grant procedures. If they don't, I still think it's important to do. Is it important to do after every meeting? That's hard to say. I think you guys kind of have to play that out yourselves. You want the feedback. You want to know why people are coming or not coming. But at the same time, you want to be a little cautious that evaluation of a meeting doesn't become an overwhelming part of a meeting. Any other things on agenda or other components you guys feel like I missed that you would want to add? I'm a big fan of agendas. I know for some people it doesn't matter. I can just tell you from my standpoint, and so there's other people out there who think like me, I'm pretty sure of it, which is if I show up and there's no agenda, I feel like it's a waste of my time because they haven't spent the time and energy to figure out the purpose of that meeting. So I say that from you guys knowing there are other type A people like me out in the world that are going to be really intent upon knowing what they're there to do. Does it have to have every minute laid out? No. But at least even if they just give like, here's what we're hoping to accomplish today, that makes me feel so much better. Okay. So now we're going to move on to section 5 of your book and just have you look at that piece as and maybe you have a meeting planned, you're writing about this specifically. Maybe this is more just hypothetically, if you were to pull together the partners we discussed, how would you lay out the meeting? What are the kinds of things you would do? So let's jump in to kind of thoughts on this piece. You can answer this question: what facilitator strategies are you most comfortable using, or just anything that you're thinking about agendas and facilitation and how you would lay this out.
I'll go. I love agendas too. Agendas keep me on task, and that's like my guide for the entire meeting. And I do put times on there, though I'm flexible if somebody doesn't talk as much, or somebody talks more. I have that. I can talk less in my part. So, and I also like recap the mission and the vision. We meet quarterly or whenever. I bring that back into the conversation, and active listening. And I really do like the round table where you get discussions, and that helps with the brainstorming on different projects as well. Parking lot, I like that aspect. I use a lot of that for the next agenda.
Yeah, I love that. I love active listening, which I didn't bring up. So thank you, Robin, for bringing that up. It's an essential part of the facilitation process. which is why sometimes you don't want to be the facilitator too. Like if you are active listening and you just want to add your 2 cents, then you might not be the right person to facilitate that meeting. Others?
I would add in there that sometimes if you're discussing an issue, you would say, this is the issue. And then we're going to speak, anybody who has pro for this issue, we have 10 minutes to discuss it, the pro, and then 10 minutes to discuss the cons before you go on to take an action. But if you set a time limit, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I love that idea, Sandra, the pro con. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a very big fan of structured activities, or like having a framework for discussions, whether it's like dot voting or different types of like post-it notes and then sorting stuff, different ways of brainstorming. And I also really like consensus building and like trying to draw out what are the needs and values that are like underneath what people are saying. But I find that like planning an agenda for that takes time, and it both is really important because I think it helps you get to a decision that more people are really happy about and have more buy-in for. But even just the planning the agenda for something like that like takes quite a bit of time. But I think it's often time well spent.
Yeah, thank you. And one thing we didn't talk about is actually agenda planning with others. I mean, recognize you don't have to agenda plan in a bubble. So, I mean, if you have topics that you think are going to be really hard to plan for, if you already have a governing committee or just the people that are really active and you want to call and run an agenda by them, like utilize those people to help you put this meeting together. It not only helps you create a good agenda, but it also is going to help ensure participation. If they helped create the agenda, they're going to help keep the discussion going. Thanks. Joshua or Linda, anything you guys wanted to add?
Sometimes breakout sessions in smaller groups are really helpful. And you can get in more detail about what everyone is thinking, and I guess also consensus building as well.
Yeah, thank you. Breakout sessions and consensus building. Yeah, breakout sessions are a super great way to take a big group and get some ideas and do it in a smaller capacity. Thank you. Joshua?
Yeah, I was gonna say, thinking about the living wage stuff that I mentioned earlier, was thinking of introducing the idea of health and all policy as a sort of a inroad to talking about this discussion. And then, state reasons for meeting, obviously. And, but also I like the idea of having it posted somewhere, the agenda on the wall, so people can easily read it and follow along. I like agendas, I also like visuals, and those things help me. I'm always checking in like, okay, where are we at? Where are we going? That kind of stuff. So, and then from there, just, have people introduce themselves, a couple minutes. What do they want? Ask them what they want to leave the meeting with. And then, I'd start with sharing data around this topic, like the stuff that's pertinent, and then making the connections between income, food choices, and health outcomes. There's research out there. So I think a lot of people are unaware of it, just sharing some of that data briefly to kind of make the point. And then present goals to change government policy. Again, reiterating why are they there? What are we hoping to do? And then, actually open up for discussion and ask people if they're hesitant, what are they hesitant about? What are their concerns? What are their anxieties? And then what would they like to see happen in order to address their concerns? So, because oftentimes I've been in different discussions and people, they just have one or two concerns, and if they can be addressed, then they're like, yeah, they're on board. So I think it's nice to ask up front, hey, do you have any concerns? How can we address that? So reaching out and trying to build that partnership.
Yep, I love it.
That's what I have.
Those are great, Joshua. A couple things that you brought up that I just want to go expand a little further on. One is just the learning types. You brought up you like the agenda, but you also like the visual. And I just think if you think of that in multiple ways throughout your meeting, like somebody's going to want to visually see this. When you talked about data, someone else is going to want to hear a story. So can you incorporate a story from the community along with the data that tells the story? So finding a way to kind of break down your agenda a little bit piece by piece on okay, how do I present this in multiple ways? So regardless of where their passion lies or how they like to learn, I've presented it in that manner. Mm-hmm. Which also brings forward, there's easy little things you can do too, have, depends how long your meeting is, of course, but we've all been to the meetings that have little toys on the table. People like to fidget, people like to do things, think through those type of things too. The other thing that I didn't actually add to this presentation, and I kind of should have, so I'm just going to tell you guys about it and you may want to look into it. So there's a concept called appreciative inquiry. AI, appreciative inquiry. And really the idea is about how you get people to talk about something, particularly if it's a negative subject or a hard subject to talk about. So instead of asking kind of what are the needs, you ask about them to story tell. When is a time we were really successful at this? When was a time, this went really well in our community? And what were the factors that were putting that in place? What were the factors that supported that? And then how could we build upon that to keep that success going? And so it's not always the right way to go, depending on where you're at, but particularly if you think it's going to be a subject that's hard. So I'm going to give my example. I got to, I really enjoyed it. Interview local and tribal health officials about their COVID-19 experience about midway through the pandemic. And the intent was for us to come up with, as public health organizations in Montana, what do we need to do? What do they need from us to specifically support this work? We had a lot of concern that we're going to call and they're so tired. There's political issues that we were just going to kind of hear this litany of all the bad things going on, and we wouldn't be able to draw out how can we help you? And so we went in with hey, what's a time in the COVID-19 response that you really felt like the response was going well? Your community was behind you, you had political support. Tell me what was going on at that time. What were the factors that were in place that helped do that? Now tell me about, it's a year from now, you've gotten through the COVID-19 response. What were the things that helped you succeed at that? And so from that, we were able to draw on people saying, well, this was really helpful, but I don't have it anymore. Okay, let's get it back. And so it's just a way to flip the script if something's negative. So I would encourage you to look into it. Any other thoughts on that piece? Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question or a thought. When I was writing this out, I was thinking that it might be prudent to keep it specific and focus on a real tangible goal versus, something so big and varied, so I guess my question is, what are your thoughts about that? Do you find that to be better? For example, if we want to focus, I don't know, world peace, I'll say, most people are eyes glaze over, never going to happen, but hey, we're going to reduce the rate of violence in this one community. you know, so that's kind of the difference there. And so I was
Yeah.
thinking, is it more important to try to focus on very specific things going into the meeting?
So I'll just kind of give my 2 cents, and anyone else who wants to jump in. I would say you have to get to being very specific for action to happen. I think you want to be careful how specific you start with. And what I mean by that is if you want the group engaged to help you move forward a solution, it needs to be a solution they were engaged in creating. And so sometimes it's helpful to start just a wee bit broader and have them focus in and say, like, and the dot voting that Erica gave, like, you can throw up what are all the ways to address this or do this, and then let people narrow it in for you. That would be my only piece to say, is if you get too narrow without the group being together, they may not be behind your idea. Does that answer it?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you for your
I don't know if
perspective.
anyone else has thoughts. Yeah. Did you have another thought? Sorry, Joshua.
No, that's it. I was just thinking about, you know, how specific should you be going into some of this. I've seen both. You know, I've been in meetings where, you know, some people try to focus on world peace and it goes nowhere. And then, you know, people try to go down a rabbit hole and they've also haven't been very successful as well. So trying to strike the balance between the two.
Yeah. That I would like take world peace and move it here, and then I would have the group move it here.
Okay.
I mean, I think you need to narrow it down. It's just how narrow do you get before you include them?
Sure.
Is that balance? So lesson learned. So this is a poll, and we'll have Emily pull that up. Again, true story. These are all true stories. I've had so many successes and failures in this process. So I had a coalition once. We invited people. It was a brand new coalition. I got over 30 people to the first meeting. After that, I had 20. Then all of a sudden I was at 15. Then I was at 10. So what action step would you take? So Emily, do you want, there we go, pulled up the poll. Okay. So call each person, great way to handle it. Looking at changing the meeting date and time, I think that's an important thing to look at. No one voted for serve food, and I kind of wasn't joking on that. Have you guys, seriously, if you serve food at a meeting, people show up. I see Erica nodding. It is like this mystery thing that everyone loves free food. So don't discount that if you have the funding to do it. All of these really are just strategies you could do. I don't know. Have you guys used any other strategies that you would want to share with the group? I just wanted to get us thinking through, if it's not working, how do you go back to the drawing board? Well, don't be afraid to recognize when a coalition meeting isn't working and think through some different ways to handle it. I do think the calling each person individually is super important, particularly if you feel like you can get an honest answer from them. You may just have to call 2 of the 10 people that are there, 3 of the 10. If 3 of the 10 give the same answer right as soon as you call them, stop right there and start working on that. Okay. So that is all I had for us today. So I would just love to hear from you guys. If you have just one thing you're going to walk away and do, one thing as a result of this, one other, whatever it is, one thought you want to share, one last comment, one thing you think I missed, you want to make sure is said. Basically, say whatever you want, and we'd love to hear from you.
Well, thank you for the great discussions. I liked that, and that helps take away the message, bring it back to me. So
Good, thanks, Roman.
I liked working through the workbooks. I think it's very helpful to actually write something down. It's kind of I think commitment is important. So the idea of writing something down helped facilitate my thoughts around this topic.
Yeah, I'm super interested to hear how your project goes, Joshua. It sounds like a really important thing to be working on. So thank you.
Yeah, I think
really
it was
like-
just, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think it was just really encouraging and made me realize that I'm not the only person that's concerned about this, and that, you know, I have the power, and we all have the power to influence and bring other people into this situation and make things better.
And be okay to fail, Sandra. I mean, when Emily came to me and said, this is what we want a presentation on, it was like, well, there's no right or wrong way. Like, some of this is good. Some of these strategies are going to work, some are not. But just keep trying. Thanks. Erica, you had something?
Yeah, I have two, maybe more thoughts. I'll try and be succinct though. One, I really appreciate how participatory this was. You know, I think if I look at a 4-hour webinar, it's like, oof, okay. But I really appreciate that it was engaging, and like the individual work and then sharing back made it feel engaging. And then I think in terms of the content, the pieces I'm really thinking about right now are how to make things sustainable, and then how to get lower on that pyramid. And I think it's going to be an interesting time while grants are kind of transitioning to both like need to have the numbers of like I reached this many people with workshops while also trying to like get lower, but I'm excited for that challenge.
Yeah, good. It is hard. It's a hard thing to balance what the funders want with the bigger picture. Thanks. Linda, did you have anything?
I just wanted to say thank you for the framework you gave us. It does put things in perspective, and it's the guide to follow, obviously, for any subject or topic you might want to investigate.
I don't know if I caught that all. Emily, did you catch it?
No, not all of it.
Sorry, Linda. You said if you need something in this next week, or do you want to put it in the chat? I apologize, I didn't fully catch that. Okay, well, hopefully, please put it in the chat. I want to make sure we get your comment and have that. So, Emily, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for this. I liked this small crowd. I'm glad that you guys all could speak and discuss. Sometimes that's nice with the small group versus the big one. So thank you all for being so engaged.